First, I have to apologize for the poor quality of this video. I'm not a YouTube star, but someone in the original thread was always asking for a video so they could see how this ROM behaved. And although at first I thought it was annoying, now I'm sort of thinking it's maybe a good idea. So here we go. This is a Nook Simple Touch with the glow light feature. I use this one to do most of my work on because I don't like to read on it since the background is kind of muddy looking compared to the original Nook Simple Touch. So we have a way to get directly from the stock ROM to CyanogenMod 11. This is the first of 3 screens in the boot sequence. There's the splash screen. Occasionally it will hang on this screen, in which case you have to use the power button repeatedly to get it to reboot. But it doesn't happen very often, and I haven't figured out if there's anything I can do to make it not do that ever. Maybe someone else can. The second screen, assuming that it gets there, is a white screen, and the third screen is unfortunately a black screen. And there we go. We're now in a CyanogenMod 11 SD card based ROM. Most of the shortcuts that you see on the screen are just that. They're shortcuts to Opera Mini or the stock browser. The only actual apps that are on the screen right now in the main screen are Overdrive, the File Manager, and the Yelp Store. And then down along in the dock, there's a rotation lock, Opera Mini, email, and the companion app to the one that you saw on the stock NST, which takes you back to the stock ROM without swapping out the SD card. So just to give you an idea on how things work on here, let me open up Overdrive. Sometimes things work wonderfully well, and sometimes there's a lot of flashing to black screen. This is one of those times, but it didn't last very long. And so here we are in Overdrive, and I've got a book checked out. And just to show you, although Overdrive opens very quickly, and you can check out books from your public library with relative ease, the opening of the book is a slow process. I'm not sure why that's true, except that the ROM itself is quite slow. However, once the book is opened, then you can read through it generally and do all the sorts of things you might want to do about adjusting defaults and whatnot fairly easily. But you do have to wait for it to load. There's no question about that. I had a crazy idea at one point that once a book was downloaded this way, that if you had the old Overdrive app installed on the stock, you could maybe share the book with it if it was authorized with the same Adobe ID, but I never could get it to work out. And again, that's something that maybe someone else can do. Now, once a page is loaded like this, then in the time it takes you to read the page, then the app is actually ready to do some work. If you go after it right away as soon as the page appears, it's likely to just sit there. But if I'm talking long enough so that an average person could read through this page, and then I go ahead and try and change the page by tapping on the right, there it goes. And so it will continue. The app seems to load a certain number of pages, like in a chapter, for example. And so when you get to the end of a chapter or a section, it may actually pause for a moment to do some more loading, which is unfortunate, but that's the way it works. To get out of this, and by the way, all the adjustments work. The light even works with the glow light if you want to change that. Again, you can see it's very slow. Okay, so we're back to the home screen for the app, and then the back button will take us out of that. Hopefully. The back button is one of the least responsive, there we go, one of the least responsive buttons on here. And so sometimes you have to go after it a couple of times. Let's see. What else is on here that needs to be looked at? Probably not much. I have an app that I wrote, which is kind of lame, but usually works for booting into Twerp, which is very, very difficult to do. So this is a way to do it, but there are some caveats, and you can read about that in the posting. But it is possible to get into Twerp theoretically, and I may actually try that before I leave this. Let's get back to there and open up Opera. Opera Mini is probably the best browser for this, although at times it can be very, very slow. But at other times it just sails right into an opening screen and you're off and running. You just never quite know. And you see I have a bunch of bookmarks on there. Although how Sam's Club got on there, I imagine that's something that Opera Mini just recently added by itself, and that doesn't actually belong there, but I'll get rid of that later. One thing I like about Opera Mini is that there's actually a way out. As opposed to things where you're just hammering away at the back button trying to escape from them. In the quick settings tiles, I have Wi-Fi and brightness. Brightness actually controls the glow light on here, and settings. If you don't have glow light, you can obviously remove the brightness tile, or you can add any other ones you want. Okay, I guess that's pretty much the idea here. Let me get this one out of the way and substitute for it a regular NST. This one has already been booted up to the CyanogenMod Model 11 ROM, and you can see the screensaver app functioning here. I have added to the apps, or added to the images that I posted, the nature screensavers cropped at the top so that the press end button below to wake up your Nook is still on there. You could obviously recrop images in any way you want. You can see that the screensaver image cannot hide the nav bar. That's just a CyanogenMod Model 11 thing. And Tasker, which I used to create the screensaver app, the nav bar can't be hidden. When you press on the end button to wake up your Nook, there's a slight shimmer in the screensaver image, and then a swipe in any direction across the screen will eventually make it go away. This is the version of the ROM with microG installed, so it's possible to have Google accounts and to install some things like playbooks and Google Drive, and they all work fine. Otherwise, everything else on here is pretty much the same as the other. Let me load up playbooks again to give you some idea of the time constraint here. Just like everything else, you sometimes get black screens when you open it, and sometimes it works just fine. And like Overdrive, the book is slow to load, but once it is loaded, you're usually fine. So let me load up this one and give you an idea of what that's like. The infamous spinning circle. I checked this several times against the online copy of the book, and it does sync, assuming that you have Wi-Fi on either at the beginning or the end or the middle. I don't know exactly how Google Books are supposed to work because I don't use them, but it does sync pages so that theoretically, if you were accessing the same book from another device, you would be on the same page, or at least very close to it. I didn't try purchasing a book, although the store does seem to function as far as I could tell. And this has the same constraints on it that, there we go, that's done now. So pretty soon the text will appear. That the Overdrive app has, which is that when the text finally appears, as it just did, then in about the time that you would take to read this page, it will be actually ready to advance on to the next page. It just, the poor processor is chugging along, trying to figure out what to do next and being bothered by lots of other things that are going on in the background. And finally, it gets its act together, and then it's ready to do something when the time is right. So let's see if the time is right. There we go. And so it will go on and on and on. And now let's see if we can get out of this. Yep. There's more stuff that appears in the bottom pane. Typically that happens when you're online. It's shopping oriented stuff. Okay, we're out of that. I'm not going to go into Google Drive. I'm sure you've seen Google Drive if you use it, but it seems to work. I was able to upload and download files without any difficulty. And let's see, there isn't anything else additional on here. Well, there's the Yelp Store. The Yelp Store is a replacement for the Play Store. It works on both of these versions. You can see that it's already cataloged the apps that I have on my device. I would caution you against updating this way because most of the apps that you will select you really don't want to update since they work fine on here and newer ones may not necessarily. If you use the Yelp Store, you will have to add you have to sign in using a Google account because the generic Yelp Store account doesn't seem to work. But once you've done that, then it will go fine. You may get an email from Google saying, try to sign in from an unknown device. It may block it the first time. It will be okay the second time. And then once you've done it successfully, you won't have to sign in anymore. It will just automatically use that account. Okay, as long as we're here and before we finish this video, let's just go ahead and try the boot into recovery, which is a little perilous, but we'll give it a shot. You're supposed to do this by holding down the two lower hardware buttons during reboot, but it's a real crapshoot and very, very difficult to do and really frustrating. So I wrote this little app, which is sort of lame, and you can see there are a bunch of directions here about how to get back to a normal boot. And you need to do those once you're in twerp, or you'll just keep rebooting into twerp over and over again. But let's just see if this will actually boot into twerp. It does more often than the button method, but it occasionally will fail and hang on the splash screen. If you have a glow light, during this process, the light comes on. For some reason, the twerp screen is so dark, maybe it thinks you need a light to see it. If you're not using a glow light, then you just have to keep your fingers crossed. After the splash screen, you should see the white screen briefly, and then it should go into twerp, assuming that it hasn't hung up. How about that? And there we are. So now to get out of twerp, you have to do all the fancy stuff that it says on the splash screen before you entered twerp, and I'm not going to bore you with that. But anyway, that's what the ROM looks like, a very brief overview so you can sort of see how it behaves.